Okay, this is my great pleasure to introduce Vishnu for this giving this presentation. Vishnu has been a student at Carnegie Mellon University, and this will be his last year to be as a graduate student, and he's graduating this year, and he's looking for a postdoc. Yeah, today he's going to talk about the work he has done collaborating with Marcus Eisenbach at Oak Ridge National Lab last year, and the topic will be electrical resistivity from first principles calculations. Now, Vishnu, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about the research that we've been doing over the past year or so. And also there are some people joining from China where it's 11 o'clock. So hopefully this is worth your time and you enjoy the talk. So yeah, so our work has involved electrical resistivity using first principles DFT calculations. And the main motivation behind this is to study disorder effects on electrical resistivity. Most real materials have some sort of disorder, whether it's atomic displacements, where atoms are slightly displaced from the ideal lattice sites, or it's chemical disorder, where you have there's no fixed arrangements of the different species. The species may be present randomly in your system, or more mechanical defects such as stacking faults or slip or something like that. And all of these have significant effects on not just resistivity, but many useful properties. So we are specifically interested in resistivity, and we'd like to study how this disorder affects the resistivity. And it also works the other way around. So if you are able to understand how the disorder affects the resistivity, you should also be able to create disorder in a system to get the sort of resistivity that you want. It gives you, could give you a degree of tunability, which could be desirable. So the basic formula that we use to calculate the electrical resistivity is the Kubo-Greenwood equation. It is given here in this first box, where your J, mu, and J nu are current operators, which in the non-relativistic framework is essentially the momentum operator. And your phi's are eigenstates. And you have these angled brackets over here representing the ensemble average over your random system. And you can do some very simple algebra here and express this in terms of Green's function, or specifically the imaginary part of the Green's function given here in the second equation. And this is a very useful form as opposed to the first one, because in the KKR method and the must code that we're using, the imaginary part of the Green's function is very readily available to us, because that's what we use to, in fact, calculate the density in our density functional theory. So we should be able to just take the imaginary part of the Green's function and sort of plug it into this equation and get the conductivity, which is what we are doing essentially. And in fact, you can even further simplify this, because we know that in the KKR method, we use the multiple scattering theory formalism, where the Green's function, the imaginary part of the Green's function, can be expressed in terms of scattering matrices tau. So with further simplifications, you can write this conductivity as this combination of these four sigma tilde terms at two energies slightly above and below the Fermi energy in the imaginary axis, denoted by epsilon f plus I delta and epsilon f minus I delta. And you take the limit as delta tends to 0. And this sigma tilde is then given by a product of two tau matrices and two current matrices, where the current matrix is essentially the matrix element of the current operator. And here you just get the tau matrix from the code, from your KKR code, and you plug it in here. So the term inside the ensemble average itself is not hard to calculate. What is the interesting thing here is, how do you deal with this ensemble average? So there are broadly three ways to deal with ensemble average when you have a random system. So if your randomness is not too much, let's say you have some binary alloy and you just want to see chemical disorder, it should be possible to enumerate literally just enumerate all the possible configurations and then average. But of course, it is clear that if it's an extremely disordered system, this is not practical. The second approach is to construct an effective medium. So if you can somehow replace your random system with some sort of effective system where the medium that you construct is similar to your ensemble average, then that should give you a very efficient way of dealing with disorder. And this is what we do in CPA and in KKR CPA. And this is a very effective method for chemical disorder. So when you have complete randomness in terms of just chemical disorder, you should be able to use KKR CPA conductivity, which sort of has been very well studied. So there have been many papers where people have used KKR CPA based conductivity to calculate random alloy electrical resistivity. But if you have more complex sorts of disorder, displacements, etc., it becomes much harder to use CPA. The third one, which is the approach that we're going to take, that we have taken in this research, is to construct one large supercell. And you construct the supercell such that it's self-averaging. And then you do the calculation on that one supercell, which should then effectively represent your ensemble average. Now, in conventional DFT, where your computational complexity scales with the cube of the number of atoms, it's not practical to do very large systems. It takes ages. But there is a method called LSMS, which was invented by Yang and Malcolm and others, where you can use this concept of an LIZ, or a local interaction zone. So say you have an atom N, technically what you should do is to consider the multiple scattering of electrons between N and every other atom in your system. And that is what you would do in conventional KKR. But if the system is random enough, then you can say beyond a particular radius, RLIZ, the sort of scattering between two atoms is negligible. So you don't consider scattering between, say, atom N and an atom outside this dashed circle. So in that sense, your computational complexity becomes much simple, because then your scattering matrix just involves the atoms inside this circle. So your tau matrix, effectively, instead of being N cross N, where N would be all the atoms in your system, your tau matrix is now effectively the number of atoms inside your LIZ. So N LIZ cross N LIZ, which is a smaller matrix. So instead of having an N cubed scaling of your code now scales, it still scales with the cube of the LIZ, but it scales linearly in the number of atoms. So for a fixed LIZ, if you then increase the number of atoms in your system, you should observe linear scaling. So this allows us to do DFT calculations for very large systems quite efficiently.
So may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Are you aware of some situation limits where taking a modest size for this zone is insufficient?
Yes. So in fact, that is in our conductivity calculations, we find that we need larger and larger LIZs. So for regular DFT calculations, you can get away with a modest LIZ size. So there's a fast convergence of the total energy with respect to the LIZ size. But for conductivity, we find that we're not able to see that convergence. So we have to do some sort of, we still use as large LIZs as we can, as is practically possible for us. But then beyond that, we have to do some sort of extrapolation.
I see. So the reason I'm asking is that, early on when people did studied weak disorder in metals, then one can analytically calculate the leading corrections to Boltzmann transport to CPA. And there is such a thing as called in two dimensions, the the universal conductance fluctuations. So you get some large fluctuations, as for example, in vary the Fermi energy. There are large fluctuations in the conductivity, which are more than one. And those can be maybe averaged, or if you put some broadening, you can suppress some of these problems. But in fact, there are, and these things are very sensitive to large distance physics to some extent. Now, this may not be so important in 3 dimensions. I'm not sure about this. But I'm just was asking because the people usually say that the leading singularities in weak causation come from large distances, and then so the question is, how much can you capture if you actually limit yourself to effectively smaller system? I mean, in terms of coherence, like here. But okay, you'll show some results.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important aspect of conductivity because yeah, I mean, ideally we would like to go to larger. So at the LIZ sizes at which we get good convergence for DFT, we don't get good convergence for conductivity. So conductivity needs larger LIZ sizes. So that is what we have found based on our calculations. Yeah. Yeah. So basically we want to just solve this Kubo-Greenwood equation within LSMS. And it's a very simple modification. So you now get rid of your angle ensemble average brackets. You're just doing that one large system. And now instead of M and N sums, which were initially going over your entire system, so your M would still go over your entire system. But for each atom M, your N would only go up to the LIZ, because tau Mn, if M and N are outside LIZ, is 0. That is the basic LSMS theory. So this is the formula that we have then implemented. So we have implemented this in the open source code LSMS, which is maintained by Marcus. And we place each atom on a separate MPI rank or separate GPU. And the tau matrix is calculated on the inverse of the tau matrix is calculated on the GPUs. So as a result, we have good parallelizability, and we're able to do very, very large systems on Frontier, which is the supercomputer at Oak Ridge National Lab.
So is this already open to the public?
Yes.
So anyone can come in and do these large calculations?
Yeah. You would need access to large supercomputing cluster, but the code is available. Yes.
The code is available. Okay, that's really awesome. Yeah.
So we first tried it on some pure elements. So just to see what we would get effectively. And when we tried for silver and lithium, first you see that there is a linear trend of the resistivity with respect to the inverse of the LIZ.
Sorry, can you explain why is there, for pure silver, why is there resistivity in the first place?
There shouldn't be. So as our LIZ goes to infinity, which is when you capture the full system, the resistivity should go to 0.
Oh, okay.
But as long as you have a finite RLIZ, then you're not actually capturing the full crystalline system. You're still effectively seeing some cluster.
Really? So this is actually something interesting, because you think that I'm not sure if I understand this very well, but you think that if you do some truncation like this can be done maybe in a way that it doesn't break translational invariance. In other words, that you could still get a zero resistivity. But I mean, maybe this is so this is sort of an interesting. I mean, like, for example, I'm thinking, like in cellular DMFT, they break the system into blocks, and each block is treated like an impurity model. But then the system becomes periodic with a different periodicity than the real system, which is an approximation, but it's still periodic. And according to Bloch's theorem, whenever it's periodic, it should have no resistivity, right? So
yeah.
I'm a little surprised, because this is a clean system. So yes, you are truncating, but your truncation is periodic. So I don't. This begs the question: why can this be arranged in such a way that it doesn't break translational invariance?
So the thing about LSMS is being real space, we don't really put any periodic boundary conditions in our actual
Yeah, but
LSMS
once you
calculation.
converge your equations, then the system is periodic.
Yeah, so once this our LIZ is large enough, it captures the
No,
whole
I'm
system and
saying
should be infinity.
even if our LSD is modest.
Yeah.
So suppose you solve DFT equations, then you have the wave functions at the end.
Yeah.
For given our LIZ. And these wave functions should be, but they have to be periodic.
Yeah.
So if the wave functions are periodic, why is there no resistivity not zero?
So I think it's because in our LSMS, we still have we don't actually see a crystal. It's only zero if it's a crystal. But since effectively in our LSMS calculations, you never actually see a crystal. You only see a large cluster. So as a result, there is some finite resistivity.
Maybe I can add, if you go back to the Kubo-Greenwood formula, which has a sum over m and n, you see for a finite system, the conductivity is a finite number.
Is it because the finite system is like having a resistor with contacts, and then you basically have the contact resistance? Is that what it is?
So one thing is you in LSMS you're actually not seeing a periodic wave function.
Yeah, I understand, but
it only becomes periodic in the limit of RLIZ going to infinity.
Well, you know what I'm confused about is that when you suppose you actually calculate, you converge it before you start doing Kubo-Greenwood. You converge the equations, then you have the Green's functions, which are a function of the I and J distance between I and J, right? But these Green's functions, they have to be periodic. How can it be not periodic, right? Because
because they come from a finite cluster. So if you were to take your say your cluster for which you calculated, and the Gij, your Green's function within this cluster, depend on where you take them. So say a G center and somewhere else is different than what would be for the periodic system equivalent atoms somewhere shifted in the cluster.
I see.
Because of the boundaries of the cluster.
I see. So this is I sort of understand it. I have to admit that this is still bugging me, but I'm not sure exactly why. So yeah, why don't you go ahead?
I think
and if you listen to Vishnu's talk, he developed a theory why it should look like as it does. So
yeah, and I think it's generally because in regular DFT, you generally assume the wave function to be some sort of block function type form, and then you put that, and when you make that sort of assumption, and you end up with the Schrodinger equation with the k, and you are automatically putting the periodicity in that. So that's why you end up with something periodic. But we have no such the equations here. There is the block theorem is not applied here.
I understand. So this is like having a wire with one section of the wire has, let's say, impurity, so it's a resistor. Then there is the rest of the wire, which are, you can consider contacts. Then you can ask a question: am I calculating the resistivity of the wire, or you're calculating resistivity of the contacts? And these contacts actually have a finite resistivity, but this can be subtracted somehow. I think that there is a way to eliminate the contact resistance. So I'm rambling. So why don't you go ahead? I whether this can be done better, I don't know. Probably not, right? But I'm just kind of okay. Just go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense that it's probably due to the fact that you have a surface in your finite cluster, as opposed to not having any surface in your infinite bulk system. But I think also in these sort of pure elements, there is no sense of convergence at all, because every time you increase your cluster size, you're adding more scattering terms, which are actually significant because your scattering matrix is so slowly decaying.
Right. So,
these-
just to understand, if we wanted to do not a DFT in continuum, but if we had a tight binding model with, let's say, Hartree approximation, then we could define this radius the same way, right? So in other words, this is not specific to the continuum DFT. You could do one-man model with some self-consistent scheme for interactions, some Hartree focal or whatever. And then you face the same issue. So you could tackle it better by the defining this radius, and then you could ask. I'm just asking because maybe some of these issues. How can you tackle the final radius features in the clean case? Maybe for one-man model that will be simpler, or it will be easier to see how you can improve this. Maybe this method. Okay, so now okay, right?
Yeah, I think the improvements that people have recommended for the LSMS approaches. So outside the LIZ, the tau is 0, but it doesn't have to be. We could have some medium.
Yes. I see.
Yeah, so that's I think that's the improvement
Yes.
that has been recommended.
I see. I understand. Okay, right.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so we have these pure elements, and there are two things. So the resistivity should go to 0 in the infinite RLIZ limit, and we find that it does go pretty close to 0. And there's a linear trend, strong linear trend, as RLIZ is increasing, which is interesting to us.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. We also did some pure elements, where we got some slightly weird results. So in aluminum, you see this very nice linear trend again. But also here, it seems to be slightly above 0. I mean, but in vanadium, we have this peak. It seems to be, without that peak, somewhat linearly going to 0, but we have this sort of anomalous peak here that we have not yet explored as to why that peak is there. But what we wanted to...
But this is a very large radius. It's like a 20, right? Corresponds to a radius of about 20. Is it 20?
Yeah,
is it
20 atomic units? Yeah.
What? So that's yeah.
Yeah, this is quite several hundred atoms.
That's too weird.
Yeah,
okay, right.
But yeah, so
too weird.
So what we wanted to see was the linear trend, if we could build some sort of theory for why that is happening. So to do that, first we wanted to move away from the sum, because things are much nicer if you have a continuum. So to do that, you can, if you have a pure element, all the m terms are identical. So you just set m to 0 and get rid of this n factor. Now you have this term here, where effectively this sum is, you have some atom 0, and you're looking at scattering between 0 to n and back from n to 0. So tau 0, O n, and n 0. And you have the sum over n. But if you sort of zoom out a bit, you can also view this as an integral over the density. And you can convert this sum into an integral over the product of tau matrices. And here I've taken the density is assumed to be constant, and we take that out. So effectively, if we get a functional form for the tau, which is the sort of how the multiple scattering matrix decays with RLIZ radius, then we should be able to get a functional form for your sigma tilde in terms of the RLIZ radius, which is what we want. So here the tau matrix is the multiple scattering, and which is by definition a sum of all possible scatterings. And you can sort of write this sum. So you have single body, 2 body, 3 body, and so on. And here the G is your free electron propagator. And here the distance element of the free electron propagator is given by this Hankel function. So, and at large R, when these two things are large, this effectively becomes EI kappa R by kappa R, where kappa is like a wave vector.
Yes.
And so in a very simplified form, we should be able to express tau up to first order in 1 by R as some constant times EI kappa R by R. This is how this should decay. And if we insert that into your sigma tilde, then you have this product, which is very straightforward to evaluate. Your R squares cancel. This is an exponential integral. And if you do that, and then as you may recall, the conductivity is actually a combination of these four terms and these four different energies. And if you do that, we find that these center two energies are linear. And these two other corners are exponential. And as your RLIZ increases, this linear term is what will dominate, because this linear term will keep on growing.
I see. So yeah, you know, when you do weak localization corrections, you also have the plus minus above and below. These are the singular terms. The other ones are small, or yeah. So this is very similar, very similar to, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, this is our explanation for why you see this strong linearity in the weak elements. And this also shows that if you take RLIZ to infinity, then this conductivity will diverge, which that should be the case for pure elements.
And you're saying the second term quickly goes to zero, right? Or
I think it will become irrelevant as your RLIZ becomes large, because then
yeah,
this term will dominate.
Because I see it goes down. What you said, it goes down exponentially or something, right?
Yeah, this term will keep increasing. The first term will keep increasing.
I mean, the second term will just what, oscillate, or does it oscillate, or it decays? It seems to oscillate.
No, it just oscillates. There's no decay.
No, there's no decay. I see. Whereas the other one grows. I see.
Yeah. Yeah. So this makes sense for systems where you have very sort of weak disorder and there is no sort of no disorder, and there's sort of no conductivity. There's no resistivity. But if you want to explain alloys or any system that has a finite resistivity, then how would we build a theory for that? So the problem is, in pure elements or weak disorder, your tau matrix is very slowly decaying. And that's why when you integrate it, it blows up. So it stands to reason that if you somehow make this function more quickly decaying, then it should converge. So when you integrate it, and if that converges, then you will end up with a finite conductivity. And so we consider this sort of ansatz where you add an exponentially decaying term to speed up the decay of the tau using this alpha, which is a decay parameter, which is should be physically like a mean free path, or rather the inverse of a mean free path. So now if you add this term to your sigma tilde integral and you can work this out, this actually comes out to an exponentially decaying term plus A1. So now as RLIZ goes to infinity, the first term dies off and you have some constant that remains. So this gives us a finite resistivity. But now this would be more convincing if we could show that in the weak disorder, when alpha goes to zero, this actually gives us something linear. We recover our previous linear theory. So to do that, we can consider the product of RLIZ going to zero, where which can be obtained if your alpha goes to zero and your RLIZ is something finite. So in that case, you can actually expand your exponential into some sort of into a Taylor series. And when you do that, you end up with this term here. And this may seem a bit difficult to read, but then if you flip it, in terms of resistivity, you can see that this resistivity goes as 1/r plus some constant here. And so if you plot resistivity versus 1/r, which is what we were plotting, then during weak disorder, you should be able to see linearity. But this is valid when alpha RLIZ goes to zero. So this is only valid when RLIZ is much smaller than the inverse of alpha.
But this alpha is not, is this something you put by hand, or is this something that is a property of the system?
So in our case, we have sort of set values for it, but it should be connected to the mean free path. It should effectively be proportional to so the inverse of the mean free path. So if the mean free path is longer, alpha should be much smaller, I think.
But I mean, if you actually plotted numerically the calculated scattering matrix, it doesn't actually decay exponentially.
Yeah, so when we plotted the tau, we saw a sort of oscillating decay.
But the envelope of the oscillations, does it decay exponentially or not?
We're not exactly, we couldn't fit it to any, we couldn't find a clear fit to that with tau.
Well, I mean, you could take the square it, and then it's not going to oscillate anymore. Then you can fit.
Yeah, I mean, we could fit, but then there were sort of there were multiple expressions to which we could fit, and we couldn't. We thought maybe if we could fit this form, we could just get a value for alpha from the fit, but it was possible to put different values of alpha and get reasonable fits.
So what comes to my mind is that in the limit of weak disorder, there is the Boltzmann theory result, and then there's the first correction, which is a weak localization, which blows up in 1 and 2D. And this can be actually analytically calculated, all of those things. So I would think that actually, in that sense, in this weak localization theory, if you it tells you when you have a finite system, how much is the correction to Boltzmann theory, or to do the theory, what is the correction, and depending on the system size. So my guess is that actually in the limit of weak disorder, one could actually analytically calculate some of these features, some of these parameters, because your box is like that system size in the weak localization theory. I think there maybe is a way to make the connection. Maybe that's something that we could try in the future work, actually.
Yeah, I mean, if you could send some references or something for that.
Yeah, I'll think about it. Yeah, this is very interesting.
Yeah.
It's beautiful how you actually managed to squeeze it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically this expression should be valid for a particular RLIZ that's much less than the inverse of 1 over alpha.
Yes.
But as RLIZ grows larger, this approximation should break down, of course, and you should get your non-linearity. But if your alpha is small, then 1 over alpha is quite large. So the range of RLIZ over which you see linearity will keep increasing. And so, so that's the idea behind our plotting. So here are some results for alloys. So the first system that we looked at was aluminum vanadium at a range of different concentrations. So here's why I said previously that our RLIZ was not sufficient. So we got data up to this last data point here, which is the physical extent to which we could actually get the RLIZ to which we could go to. Now, the problem with this is there are many different alphas that could fit this, because you don't actually see significant nonlinearity, or are there any nonlinearity in the actual data points. So the best we can do at this point is to give bounds. So the lower bound is the weak scattering limit when alpha goes to 0, which is if this sort of remains a straight line almost all the way to the end. So that gives you one extrapolated value. The other extrapolated value is the strong scattering limit, which is, let's say this is the last data point at which this was linear. And after this data point, it's immediately started becoming nonlinear, which is the strong scattering limit. So we recognize that as a the mean free path of 6 to 7, which is very small mean free path. And so now if you plot that, you will get a strong scattering limit. So this should be your upper and lower bounds. So your actual alpha resistivity should be between these two. And when we plotted these two and we plotted the experimental value, we found that the experimental value actually lies between these two.
But can I just ask, usually people say in the books that you can, if you just average the single particle Green's function, then that's the quantity that oscillates with the I minus J. But if you take the absolute value will decay. So if you average it over disorder, then it will decay with the mean free path. And that's how you can define the mean free. This is the definition of the mean free path from the single particle Green's function.
Yeah.
So one could, in principle, you could take the LSMS data without the Google formula and actually define a mean free path, which is uniquely defined based on the Green's function for decay. So is it possible to try that?
Yeah. I think it could be possible. I mean, when we plotted the scattering matrices, we found that the decay of the scattering matrices, the length didn't really match. So this should, according to that, this should be decaying much quicker. But yeah, that's still somewhat unresolved. Yeah, we could explore something like that. Yeah, it's still somewhat mystifying to us why it takes such a large RLIZ for it to decay. Yeah, that's why initially we thought fitting for an alpha value here doesn't work, because any alpha value from 0 to 0.15 could be a reasonable fit to the data and give you some value. So that's why we went with these bounds and decided to see if the experimental value is in somewhat good agreement with this. And we find that for
what do you mean by experimental? When they actually a real experiment or a numerical experiment?
No, real experiment.
Wow, this is such a good agreement. This is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So for this system, yeah, we got good agreement. Yeah. So we tried this for 5 different concentrations, and here I've plotted the upper and lower bound, so the weak scattering and the strong scattering, the CPA values, and the experiment. So the CPA is always an underestimate to the experiment. That is sort of a very well observed feature across every system. And here we find that the experimental value is in all the concentrations sort of sandwiched between the upper and lower limits, which is the expectation. And then we looked at another binary alloy, which is iron silicon. And all these systems are 16,000 atom DFT calculations. So this method also showcases that you can do obscenely large systems using this method. Sure. And the DFT calculation, of course, to get converged DFT values will take some time, because you need to have good mixing parameters and all. But the conductivity calculation itself takes about 10 minutes per LIZ per data point. Wow. It takes like 10 minutes. So since Frontier is quite a large system, we can afford to put each atom on a different GPU. So we can put 16,000 GPUs, and since since because of Marcus's expertise in parallel programming, the LSMS code is quite extremely optimized, so it runs quite good.
Incredible.
Yeah. So here we have the iron silicon system, and we apply the same method of strong scattering and weak scattering, and we see once again that the dashed line of the experiment lies between the upper strong scattering limit and the lower sort of weak scattering limit. Now, binary alloys can also be done very efficiently using CPA. So while we've done binary alloys, it's not particularly a novelty to do those. So we decided to take a slightly more complicated system, which is the aluminum, chromium, titanium, vanadium, sort of a high entropy alloy, and to study how the resistivity would change with short range order. So we have a BCC, again, 16,000 atom BCC structure. And my advisor, Professor Bidam, has done ab initio MCMD calculations at different temperatures to get.
Sorry, what is that? What is MCMD?
Monte Carlo molecular dynamics.
Oh yes, so that tells you what the vibrations. It gives you vibrations of atoms, right?
No, it gives you what the short range order parameters should.
Oh, the short range order of mixing when you build an alloy, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah. So using the MCMD at every temperature, you should be able to see what the short range order parameters are like and see its evolution with temperature.
So Mike, can you actually explain this a little bit? I mean, does it mean that these atoms actually move as you change the temperature?
Yes. So there's molecular dynamics to capture the atomic vibrations. There's Monte Carlo to swap chemical species at different sites. And so it generates an equilibrium ensemble of correlated chemical occupancy.
I see. So it is actually equilibrated, and so there is a short-range order that comes from entropic reasons, right? I see, and that's included. I see.
Well, I would say the short-range order comes from chemical reasons.
Right. Yeah. Of course, because of interactions, but the entropy limits the short-range order. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
And actually, so in reality, it's possible for these atoms at these accessible temperatures. So these are pretty high. So this is thousands of Kelvin. So they can actually swap. This is not at room temperature lower. They probably wouldn't move much, right?
Yes. In fact, the order-disorder transition that you can kind of see here has been seen experimentally. It's not only a theoretical idea, but it's actually been observed in experiment. And I should maybe call out right now Fuyang Tian, who's in the audience here from China right now, where it's almost midnight. Yeah, he's the one who first told us about this interesting alloy system.
I see. This is really fascinating. And so they know. How do they know in the experiment that you actually have motion of atoms and you know the order sort transition
from diffraction experiments and also from calorimetry?
I see. You know what comes to my mind also is because much of this project is about speeding things up. I think there are some. I mean, I've been for the Coulomb model. There are some extensions to mean field theory. There are some self-consistent corrections to mean field theory, which I think can capture the temperature dependence of short-range order. In principle, maybe there is a way to semi-analytically maybe reproduce some of these Monte Carlo results in a much cheaper way. And I personally, would be interested. I'm just mentioning this because I have this method. I would like to see if there are data available, in the model that you are studying in Monte Carlo. If there are data available, your data, how it changes with temperature, and I would be interested if I can try with my mean field theory to how much can I capture with the simplified theory, because that mean field theory on the computer it takes like a millisecond to do.
Right. So I'll send you some references that are relevant to that. I don't currently have anything written on this compound, but I have some other cases that I think you'll find informative along those lines.
So the point is that what kind of interactions you have to put in to capture this effect, right?
Yeah.
I see. This is super interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, from the MCMD, you can get what the pair correlations short-range order parameters are, and the dashed line here represents complete disorder. So it's basically each element is 0.25 concentration. It's equiatomic. So 0.25 to the power of 4, 0.0625 is what you have here. And you can see that at high temperature, everything wants to go there because at high temperature, entropy dominates. But at low temperature, you see the emergence of short-range order. So we should be able to take these order parameters at individual temperature, prepare structures, do Kubo calculations, and see how the resistivity varies, which is what we've done.
So can you explain what this means? What are the different curves here?
So here it represents each pair of species. So for example, this green line here represents the pair correlation between aluminum titanium. So what is the probability that an aluminum atom and titanium atom are next near neighbors?
I see. Thank you. Very nice. Very, very nice. Yeah.
So using this, we calculated the resistivity. So one basic thing is that as the temperature increases and your structure becomes more and more random, your resistivities are getting closer to CPA, which is correct because CPA represents the infinite temperature randomness. And the weird thing is, generally, as you increase temperature or you increase the disorder in your system, the resistivity should increase. That's the common intuition. But here, the opposite seems to be happening. So at higher temperature, where there's more disorder, the resistivity is actually going down. And this is a very counterintuitive trend. And we expect that when there is more order, there should be less resistivity. So why is the system showing the opposite trend? So to see that, we can look at the density of states. So here I have the density of states of the two extreme cases. So the blue line represents the density of states at the lowest temperature we studied, which is 275 Kelvin. And the red represents the highest temperature we studied, which is 1800. And here you can see that as you go from 275 to 1800, your Fermi energy pseudo gap has become less deep. And here you can see that there are more states occupied at higher energies. So what actually happens when you increase more order into the system is it creates a pseudo gap, a deeper pseudo gap at the Fermi energy, which results in more states being occupied at lower energies, causing the system to become more stable. But
so can you think of this as a precursor of maybe, you know, these different species would like to form some periodic structure, and the periodic structure could actually open a hard gap. But because it's not completely developed, maybe this is why there is this pseudo gap that forms. The short range order that represents some tendency to opening gaps.
Yes, that is pretty much, that is exactly what is happening. Yeah. So this gap is making the system more stable, but because of the gap, the density of states at Fermi level is dropped quite a bit. And so that has reduced your available conduction states, and you have a higher resistivity at lower temperature. So that is why you have this counterintuitive trend. And this is another example of how we can use the Kubo, our LSMS Kubo code to study a somewhat complicated system.
But presumably, if you had not equal numbers of different elements, so that they can form some periodic structure, if you had almost clean material with fewer impurities, that thing would never happen, right? So if you change the concentrations, you could get away from this regime. That's my point.
I think so. Yeah.
So then it would be the opposite. Then the resistivity, instead of going up, would go down, and then as you change the concentration, you could go into from a regime which is a conventional metallic like to this unusual regime where you invert the slope of the resistivity.
Yes, I think so. That should be possible if we change the concentrations.
Yes, beautiful.
Yeah. So this is, while more complicated than binary, we still have atoms on ideal BCC sites. So there is still, while it is difficult, still possible to include SRO within CPA and do this calculation. So we can go to an even more complicated system, such as the quasicrystal.
Wow.
So so the decagonal quasicrystal, which is aluminum, cobalt, copper. Now this system is definitely not doable with CPA, I think, right now. And so this is a good example of a system where our method is suited for systems like this. And here you have basically in the XY plane these sort of quasicrystalline motifs that you can see from the left image here. And on the right, you have repeating blocks of 8 angstroms. And this structure was generated by Yang Huang, who was a grad student in our group who has now graduated. So basically, we just took this structure and decided to run Kubo calculations. And we found that as you run Kubo calculations in the X and Y direction, where you observe quasicrystalline motifs, you see a very, very high resistivity, which seems to be very slowly changing. Whereas in the Z direction, where you observe these sort of 8 angstrom periodic blocks, you see that there is a very rapid decrease in resistivity and you see that same linear trend. The resistivity is actually going towards a small value. And this makes sense because you have a very random arrangement in these directions, and you have periodicity in the other direction. So our resistivity is able to capture the sort of the decagonal quasicrystal, the anisotropy that's present in the system. We are able to see that in our resistivity plots. So that is an example of how we can use our Kubo for a complicated system like the quasicrystal. I'm still looking for some experimental paper. I did find an experimental result, but it's at a significantly different concentration of aluminum, cobalt, copper than the one that we're doing. So I haven't put that here.
But by the way, I just want to mention something, that there is a well-known feature of quasicrystals that if you actually raise the temperature in metals, you normally raise the temperature that the resistivity goes up. But in quasicrystals, it's actually possible to have the opposite trend, like you've shown in the other case. And the reason is apparently the quasicrystals have many little gaps in the spectrum, and you can, as you raise the temperature, you can fill some of these gaps. So you can. So this actually sort of there's been a lot of work on this in the past. I know some references and some people who worked on that.
Yeah, I think that could be something interesting for us to do, to get quasicrystal structures at different temperatures and do runs. Yeah, so to summarize our methods, so the strength of the LSMS Kubo methods, we can handle many different, basically any type of disorder. If you can make a structure for it, we can do the calculation. Our code is quite well optimized, and we can do very large system. We can take advantage of exascale machines, and we are getting good agreement with experiment and CPA. The weakness is we require some extrapolation. We are not seeing convergence with our current LIZs, and we could maybe get better theory our theory right now is useful, but it is heuristic. And of course, we have some unexplained features in the pure element, which as of now, we haven't got around to doing. There are plenty of exciting opportunities. So we can do exciting systems like quasicrystals. So we have like a decagonal, but we are also working on an icosahedral quasicrystal. We can do metallic glass systems. We can study strain behavior. So since we can create many different types of disorder, it should be possible to create uniaxial strain, or maybe even create stacking faults or slip planes in your structure, and then see how the resistivity varies. And of course, there are some code improvements that are also possible in terms of memory. And our code right now is non-relativistic. If we make it fully relativistic, that would also open up other systems that could be doable. So yeah, that's all I had for now. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Wow, that's a great talk. So any questions? Let's open the floor to the audience.
I have one just short question. The mechanism you mentioned, Vishnu, for why your resistivity goes up at low temperatures is you said that the gap opens.
Yeah.
Now that mechanism, I would think, should be captured even at the CPA level, because the CPA is supposed to give you like now. Okay, you're saying that it's not easy to put short range order in CPA. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, we have actually done the system. So so in our previous work, we implemented short range order in CPA, and this was
that should give you the same effect trend, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Right. Okay, I see. Okay, thanks.
Okay. So we find that this system, if you put a B2 type order in KKR CPA, B2 type short range order, it gives you this gap.
Okay. Yeah. We're mentioning this because the so-called localization corrections, they are not captured by CPA, and they're more difficult. So it's sort of interesting to know what can be captured at the CPA level, because I think all along we've been comparing CPA with LSMS and so forth. CPA could be refined like you did. There are various refinements of CPA, but it also has some limitations in principle, which is like this loudness localization. I've been working on something very similar. If you actually have strong electron-photon interaction, you also tends to form this kind of gap, which can be temperature dependent, and it can be larger, and it opens at a Fermi energy, and it's larger at low temperature, and it can give a very similar effect. So I think this phenomenon that somehow the effective amount of disorder can be temperature dependent, and can tend to open some gaps, and then you get this insulating like behavior. That's apparently a very general phenomenon. This is a very nice example, but there are other examples which are similar, and all of them could be captured at some refined CPL level, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay, other questions? Wow, this is a 1 hour talk. Almost. Usually prepare for like 30 minutes, but this is certainly an hour. Anyway, we have anyone else wants to ask questions? Okay, if not, I'm going to turn off the recording.